Hola, hello, I'm Chris, the founder of languagesontheplate.com, and in this video I'm just going to quickly rush through how showing progress visually is really helpful for your pupils. I'm going to use one of my A-level lessons. In fact, I'm going to use the very first A-level lesson, Los cambios en la familia. And I say lesson, essentially they are kind of units of work, but I've presented them in the form of a lesson. Which, thank you for everyone's lovely feedback, I really appreciate it. So please do let me know if you're enjoying the resource. It does make me feel like I'm doing something worthwhile. Anyways, without further ado, let's go through how we can show progress visually for our pupils very, very quickly. So as you can see, this is the very first lesson or very first activity based on the context of Los cambios en la familia. What I've done here, I've given them vocabulary that I think they should have come across at GCSE. Maybe one or two words might not have come across if they're not grade 8, grade 9 at GCSE, but they should know most of these words just to get them into the right sphere. And obviously they have no prior knowledge as this is the very first lesson in the topic. Then you can see I'm starting my topic with what I call the starting point. And this, for me, is actually the most important thing to do in an A-level or IB lesson. I'm sure we've all been there before where you've overheard people say, "Oh, sir, I've learned nothing on this topic," or "I know nothing about this topic." And essentially when I heard pupils talking that way about someone else, I decided I didn't want anyone to ever have any doubts about their learning in my lessons. So then that's when I started to do this. It's really helpful for a multitude of reasons. So essentially the way that it works is you start the topic with a mind map and you do it on the board together, hopefully on a digital board so that you can pull up what the pupils actually wrote at the end of the topic so they can really visualize their progress. But they do know something before they've started in most cases. They will likely have a rough idea of a topic before they've gone into it and learned the specifics. So you start them off, what do they know? They might know some topic-specific vocabulary. So for example, the starter that I did in this lesson, they could easily write boda, casarse, divorciarse, etc. Naturally, of course, at A-level, we're kind of aiming to push them to higher level topic-specific vocabulary, but those are still topic-specific. This initial mind map functions as a bit of retrieval practice, and it enables you to have a bit of dialogue with them and see what they know. Two other things I have on this slide are case studies and or statistics and high-level idioms and phrasal verbs. Now the reasons that I've included them is I think it's really important at A-level to know your stuff and have statistics and case studies, in your back pocket so that you can talk about them and have things that you can reference. But with them seeing this right at the beginning of the topic, it indicates to them what I, as the teacher, consider to be successful learning in the topic. So to quote a teaching gospel inside the black box, pupils can only achieve a learning goal if they understand that goal and can assess what they need to do to reach it. Now this makes it clear in their mind, they can see from the beginning, oh, if I know 3 case studies or statistics, then I know the topic really well. Oh, can I push my language level higher by adding some high-level idioms or phrasal verbs? And then when we compare this to the end, it really boosts their metacognition. Another interesting point about the mind map, both at the start and at the end of the topic, is it enables you to go over any misconceptions. So those misconceptions that happen at the beginning of a topic, you can get them gone straight away. But as a useful AFL tool at the end of the topic, you can find out, was there anything in the learning process that people did not quite understand, and then you can really go over it and consolidate what it should be instead. And then obviously by the end of the topic, generally pupils are more motivated by the end of the topic because they can visualize their progress. They can see how much they actually know about the topic, when for them they probably have been learning it quite by osmosis because you've basically inputted a lot of data for them. But beside that point about learning via osmosis, by making them make their own mind maps in the format like this, they are taking ownership of their own learning. It's them that's choosing what they write as their case studies, their statistics, their topic-specific vocabulary. And as we know, and I don't think I really need to say that much more, other than it really does make it very visible for the pupils at the start and at the end, particularly at the end of what they have learned. And just to quote John Hattie in Visible Learning, when teaching and learning are visible, there is a greater likelihood of students reaching higher levels of achievement. So it is backed up. If you've been using my resources for a while, you'll have noticed that in every level, so year 7 all the way through to A level, I like to do my objectives like this. I like to have them assessed in 3 different ways: self-assessed, peer-assessed, and teacher-assessed. Obviously, you're not going to be on them so much at A level, but I found this to be a really useful tool for having pupils take ownership of their own learning and that of their peers. Interestingly, this wasn't something that I learned from my teacher training or from on the job, so to speak. I actually picked this up from my primary school observation days before I went to the PGC, well, before I started the PGCE. So a long time ago. I have developed it over that time. And again, I don't think you need me to go over all of the AFL quotes, but I think we all know AFL is really important, and having it in a variety of ways from a variety of different people helps the pupils progress. So again, just to quote from Inside the Black Box, pupils who can assess their work and that of others are in a strong position to improve it. So we know that by opening up a dialogue of what is successful, have I achieved this objective, helps them progress and understand success in the long run. It also gives them a moment to really reflect on whether they think they've hit those objectives and whether they think that they have learnt, which obviously helps with their metacognition, especially when you use terms like a specific tense, like what I've done in the second step to success here. And now I'm just going to run through the lesson or the topic unit in itself so you can see how I'm hoping that they are going to progress over this time. So the first activity following this, it's a fairly simple, easy way in to the topic at A level. I've used a lot of cognates, a lot of high frequency words that they should have come across at GCSE level. But what I've done is I've given them a sort of A level style reading. It's not quite, but because it's in English rather than synonyms, but they're trying to find the words in order, and naturally if they know the words that are in the first place and in the third place but don't know the second one, they will know that the second word is going to be in between. Now I do this activity very early on in all of my A-level resources. Obviously if you have the resources you can do things in whatever order you want, but essentially what I've done is I have scoured the internet for official data from governments so that I can give my pupils relevant data that contextualizes the content of the topic for them. And that's before they've even gone into any case studies or context around it. In addition to that, I've got topic-specific vocabulary, obviously within the translations that I've either gone through already with them in the lesson in the previous reading, or I've given it to them in the vocabulary box below, or I'm expecting them to know it already based on their progress through their A-level course. And again, just to highlight things that I think are above and beyond, I try to identify for them things like high-level idiomatic verbs, as you can see there. And then I've explained to them as well where I've got those statistics from. So when they translate the sentences, what they have is they have a very simple set of sentences that shouldn't cause too many problems for them. I then move on and I highlight what are the cultural aspects that you should know about that make this topic a bit more interesting and a bit different to England, or Britain, I should say, or the UK, I should say. And again, within that, I've highlighted topic-specific vocabulary that I think is going to be important for them to know, and I'm identifying it for them right at the beginning and giving them the English breakdown, so it's not too overwhelming for them. I want them to understand the content at this point rather than just language only. Again, to help pupils be successful, I often do pre-listening, pre-reading. The purpose is to make it accessible for them. I don't think if you're teaching A-level, I don't think you need me to really go into the benefits of pre-listenings and pre-reading activities, but it does make those documents more accessible for them, and then they can feel successful at what they're doing. Now, I quite often like to do exam-style questions throughout. Obviously, I've picked some of my favorite ones or the ones that I think are most useful based on where I think they are learning, but I do always like to take a moment to think about what we need to do as a class to make sure that we can achieve in this exam-style question. So here I've got an exam-style reading question. It's the synonym one, I think. Yep. Cinnamon, yeah, cinnamon. Yes, it's the synonym one. Pupils are trying to find the words. As I said, they are in the correct order. So if they can't find word number 2, but they have found 1 and 3, they know that number 2 will be in between. And obviously within the text, I've tried to give them again a lot of specifics in relation to Spain or the wider Spanish-speaking world, so they have even more cultural context that they can add to their mind map. Again, a think, pair, share, I think is a really great way of visually seeing, before you've gone into a grammar point, what do you know about this grammar point? What can you tell me? I need to know what your start point is so I can then get rid of any misconceptions. And then by the end of it, when you've gone through everything, hopefully they've got really comprehensive notes if they do need to make notes. Otherwise, you can just run through it at the board, and hopefully at A level they don't need to jot down too much with regards to the imperfect. And then I go through all the content, and then we practice the content again. What I've done in the practice is I've tried to link the sentences to the topic. So here I've made them in relation to the changes in family in Spain. And at this point, I go back to the objectives. So I'm taking a moment. I mean, if you're teaching A level, you've qualified as a teacher, you know what you're doing here. But I've gone back to the objectives to make sure that the pupils can do their peer assessment, self-assessment. Do you think that you know the imperfect tense? And obviously at this point, they would have learned a fair amount of the topic-specific vocabulary for family at A level. And some of them might also feel comfortable for lesson objective 3, which I don't think we're quite ready for, as that's the final one, but they might feel like they understand what family life used to be like in Spain at this point. Again, before I'm doing another exam style question, I like to go through how the question works, what are potential pitfalls, what do we need to look out for, is there any signposting, any distractors that could ruin things for us. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I've got a pre-listening here. The pupils are matching up vocabulary that I think potentially is a little bit harder for them, but most of it might be stuff they can figure out based on context. And then finally, just before I do the listening, I've got all of the options for this particular listening question type, and we're just going through them to make sure that we understand what are we listening out for. Is this something that I understand beforehand? And then it just builds that sense of confidence so that they can be successful when they tackle the activity itself. And then we have the listening activity itself. I'm not going to rush through it, you know how these work. And to round off the topic, before I go back to the mind map, I give them one more kind of longer text with a bit more context around the topic itself, with a load of vocabulary that they can use for their topic-specific vocabulary. They can choose what they want there. And at this point, I go back to the objectives again. The third objective, I think at this point, everyone in the class should be comfortable with understanding what family life used to be like in Spain at this point. And then we reach the mind map again. I find it quite useful to go through this mind map again at the board with them. Hopefully you have a digital board so you can do the before and after comparison with them. But again, they can be independent for what they think their top topic-specific vocabulary is, any statistics, any case studies they know, any idioms or phrasal verbs they know. It highlights to them what I, as the teacher, think is success in this topic, and it gives them the place to write it so that when they do their revision, they can get their quick overview. They don't need to waste their time running through all of their notes again. They already have done the hard work early days. And then, as I said, I think it's quite useful if you compare and contrast the two different mind maps. So if you do bring up the first mind map and show it to them afterwards, or maybe even before, so they can really identify their progress. The contrast will make it quite clear to them just how much they have learned. Also, some of your students might be proactive. While you're going through the case studies and statistics, they might be writing it down as you're going through it. You might want to point it out for them as well. All of these are very, very useful things for them to be doing. And then the final thing that I do this pretty much as a plenary for most topics or lessons, kind of have the hinge question of the topic. What was the family in Spain like in the 20th century? I've given them a success criteria, again, so they know what I'm looking for. And I've also given them a bit of an extra if they want to go above and beyond. And then I do a brief class model with them, highlighting the good, giving another opportunity to go over those misconceptions, Again, they can visibly see what they are doing well and the progress that they've made, and then they go on to write it individually. And then obviously I have a Quizlet link with all of my vocabulary. And then one final thing, if you've enjoyed anything that I've made or you find these videos useful, please do reach out and send me a message or subscribe to one of my services if you haven't subscribed. It enables me to be able to make content like this. Otherwise, I feel like I'm talking to a computer on my own. Gracias, thank you, adios.